we are not talking to each other. You know, we're passing, we are conversating, but we're not really talking. Instead of like Starbucks on every corner, we need a place where you can go have a discussion on every corner. That's something that people need in their daily life to understand each other. So everyone right now wants to say, change the policies. But how do you change the policies if you're not changing the mind of the people that are making the policies?
Welcome to Shaping Freedom. These conversations are about how freedom is actually formed, what we inherit, what stops working, and the choices that change how we live and lead. I'm your host, Lisane Basquiat. This is a conversation that I believe will be about communication and about the issues that we face and work through as humans and as citizens in this world. I think the timing for this conversation is perfect because we are in a world in unprecedented state for a state of affairs for the world and state of internal kind of turmoil, a lot of us. So let me get into what the conversation's about and who we're talking to. Let's do that. So most people think that misunderstanding comes from poor communication. But what if the real issue is that we're not actually responding to each other? We're responding to what each other represents based on our past and based on what we've been led to believe. Today's conversation is going to start there. I'm joined by Shawn McClendon. He's the author, recent author of Understanding Each Other, The Blueprint for a New America, which is a big title.
Yeah.
Big statement, right?
I know.
He's also a neighbor here in San Diego and the founder of the Sister Cities Project. He's a San Diego native and the father of two sons. And what's interesting about Shawn's work is that he, through the Sister Cities Project, brings people from very different lived experiences together into live, real conversation. And what he's uncovering doing that isn't just about division. It's about the ways that we interpret, react, and attempt to understand each other in the first place. He kind of starts there. So, Shawn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Lisane. Thanks for having me. Like I said, I'm excited to be here. And you know, I'm more excited to have this conversation because, as you said, I think it couldn't be more timely. You know, this is something that I really want to talk more about. So.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that we as humans are very uncomfortable with is the prospect of sitting in discomfort. We don't like it. We don't like to be uncomfortable. And you're doing work that actually asks people to sit in that discomfort and to stay in conversation. What shaped your ability to do that?
I think it had to do with my upbringing. You know, this is something that I've written about quite frequently, but it is you know, growing up, I'm from Long Beach, California. Most people know when I was growing up in Long Beach in the 80s, you know, very under-resourced community in my area. And so I grew up in a very under-resourced community. But my mom made the choice I had a choice between going to kindergarten in Long Beach. My grandmother actually worked at a kindergarten. So she, you know, it was right down the street. So I could have gone to the kindergarten there. My mom had just gotten a job at an all-white Christian school in Lakewood, California. So the choice was between where do I go, right? But my mom was very adamant that I go to kindergarten at her school. And so at the school where I went to kindergarten, I was the only Black kid at that school. And so it went from there to elementary. I went back to Long Beach, where most of the kids were Black and Hispanic. And then I went from there back to Lakewood, California for junior high school, where I was one of probably 5 Black kids in the school. And so I've spent my whole life going back and forth between all white communities and all, under-resourced communities. So for me, I've always had to do this thing where I have to fit in, right? And I have to engage in conversations with people. And so I adapt. I had this ability, or created this ability for myself, where I really wanted to be liked. And so I did a lot of things like, I rapped when I was young. I danced. So I, did talent shows and different things like that, just so I could be, um, I could be understood. I could be a part of the groups. And so that's what I did for and that's where all this came from. So going back between different communities.
And so you're saying that you got into wanting to entertain as part of your desire to be liked, understood, and seen.
Yeah, I mean, it was two parts to that. One part was I was trying to express myself, right, and be more of me, and so that people could understand me. Rapping at the time was very new, and so it was a way. It started with poetry, but it turned into rap, and so that was a way for me to express myself, so that I could let people know who I was without having to have, I guess at that point, deep conversations, right, about who I was.
Yeah, I get that. I understand that. And I think that it's what so many of us are doing, and trying to find a way. Like, how do you find the way in to get a person to the point where they become aware enough about the fact that there is another human being sitting on the other side of us that we can interact with, you know? Um, I want to get into sister cities in a little bit, but first, I'd love to ask you a few questions just to have us better understand like who you are. I know that one of the roles that you play is as a father to two beautiful sons that I've seen on the internets. How do you create intention around the kind of men that you'd like to raise at a time like the time that we're in today?
So for me at this point in my life, it's about the role model that I am. So when I talk about intention for my sons, it is strictly about me creating and being the type of person that I want them to see. And that's part of, me being a part of this nonprofit Sister Cities project is something that I started in small part because I wanted to do good in the world. And I wanted them to see that part. So that's how I approach this whole thing of fatherhood. I think it's, I can talk all day. I can say different things, but I think what children do is they really do watch who you are and what you do. So to me, that is literally number one thing for me in my life.
What you mentioned was that you recognize the fact that in that role, there's a model. You have to role model for them what you'd like them to see because as a fellow parent, what what I know to be true is the talking only works when there's action behind it.
Right.
When there's a calibration between the words that come out of our mouth and what we show our children. So I commend you for understanding that and for choosing to do that with your sons.
Yeah. For me, I think, one of the most important jobs in the world is being a father, right? And, I have, one of my things is as I talk about that in terms of being a particular role model, I also understand that, as a role model, personal development is extremely important for me. And so I am constantly trying to be better, as far as my character is concerned, as far as my, morals are concerned, as far as my integrity is concerned. And when I say that, it's not like I'm saying I don't have any of those things, but I do think you can always be better, right? in the way that people perceive you, and especially in the way that my sons perceive me. So I am always trying to get better every day. Me and my sons talk about that as well. So that to me is just so important.
It is. I'm a parent to two adult children, and I actually have grandchildren at this point. In the conversations that I've had with my children, one of the things that I recognized uh, is that hiding our own journey. And obviously, there are parts of our life we're not necessarily always going to share every single bit, depending on their age. And now I don't care what my kids know, but you know, um, it's important to share with them that there is a journey
Hmm.
and that we're on one. And because what it does for them is it helps them to understand that there's no such thing. They don't have to be perfect, like they're okay and they can be accepted as they are, and that there's room for us as human beings to evolve and to shift and to change and to course correct when there are behaviors that aren't in line with what we want because we're human beings,
Right.
you know? So I think that's very, very important for us to help our children to understand that behind even the words that we're saying, that there is this ability to grow and to evolve and to do things differently. And just because you get up in the morning thinking that blue is the right color, that you can actually change that, you know? Yeah.
And I'm sure you recognize this where, my kids are 11 and 12 right now.
Yeah,
So
babies.
I know. So they're in the middle of it, right? And so, a lot of our discussions right now are, the things, or junior high school, right? Like, and having the transition, like my oldest son just went from elementary to junior high, right? And the transition there. And then my youngest son, being in junior high without his brother, for example, or I'm sorry, elementary without his brother for the first time, and bullying and all these different things. So it's just talking about those types of things, and it's the same. We have this thing called Donut Day. So I every Sunday we go and we used to eat donuts. They're all healthy now, so they don't eat donuts anymore, which is I know, right? But every Sunday we would go, and since my oldest son was 2 years old, I would take him to Starbucks. We'd have donuts. I drink coffee because I love coffee, and we'd have a conversation. And it was so interesting because this was when my youngest son he was only one, right? But I would have these conversations with them as if they were, older. And so we've been doing that every Sunday since that time. So it's been very interesting because they've been able to see my journey, right? They've been able to see that journey, and I'm very upfront and open with them about where I'm at in life, and I've been able to kind of help them and walk them through their journeys as well because they see mine. So it's like this honesty thing, right? It's this that I feel like we have together, which has been awesome to see.
Yeah. There's an authenticity that I think is so important to the future of your relationship with your sons. Because
Hmm.
when we raise our children, and not, we don't intend to be inauthentic, but when you raise your children hiding yourself from your children, then they can't see, they rely on us to be able to see parts of themselves. And if we hide those parts from them, then it's almost like cutting off their ability to see themselves in us or to see us in them.
Yeah, and I've always looked at that. I don't know where I felt this very early on, and I think maybe I heard it from someone, but I think I've always understood for myself that like kids see all the things that you don't think they see, right? So when I early on as a father, I really recognized that I can't hide anything from them because they're going to see that. So the whole idea of trying to hide parts of myself or trying to hide things from them, I think would be more impactful in their lives, right? Than the things I show them up front.
That's right.
So I have like for them, my life is an open book to them. And so, and that's why my whole life is configured in a way where with the nonprofit and all the work that I do and the things that I do in a way where they're able to see and they're able to see my path and what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to accomplish and the man that I am. So,
Yeah. What have your sons taught you about understanding or even about being misunderstood?
I think, patience, right? Because I think the one thing about being like is like I explained with my kids now and them dealing with, I feel like it's very different now. Kids and the what kids have to deal with is very different now at a young age. And so the understanding part for me with my kids is it really is a lot of just, you know, being quiet and being patient and trying to, because I don't understand. I'm an old father, right? I'm 38 years older than my oldest son, right? So I'm 50 years old now, and so I'm this really old guy, you know, compared to them. And for all those 50 year
Compared to
olds out
them.
there,
I
I know.
mean, at 20, you'd be an old guy compared to them.
Right, exactly. So I think I have all these preconceived notions and things that I've gone through decades of this that and the other, and I can't understand their lives, right? Like I don't even and I'm being honest, like half the time I just don't even understand what they're dealing with. So I feel like I have had to be very patient, obviously listening and being quiet is very, very important. And but that patient thing, I've had to really be patient, and I think they appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. The listening is a lot of parents miss that.
Yeah,
They
right.
miss the power of listening, and I think it's sometimes the intention is to get it all in there,
Hmm.
but sometimes that's a one-way conversation.
Right,
And when you're just talking at a person, you're not giving them the opportunity to process what you're saying, to think for themselves, which is what we're really raising these children to do, and
right,
to come back with whatever their thoughts are. This is how you can have children living in a home with you and not even know who they are, because all you really know is what you said to them. You don't know how they received it. You're making them performative because they're going to do the things that they need to do in order to live in the environment that they've been birthed into. But there really is, and I cannot say it enough, and I choose every opportunity that I can to repeat and reiterate how important it is for us to listen to our children, to listen to the people we love, period.
right. To listen, period. Right.
Just listen.
Yeah.
Just listen. Yeah.
And I'm kind of a weird guy in the way that I had to learn a lot of these things, and so when I say patience, what I mean is even with the listening, right? So I have had to develop this thing where in order for me to listen, I do understand that I have to be patient and wait, right? So, like with my sons, and when we're talking, like you said, I think there is this urge to want to jump in and want to fix and want to say, you got to say something, right? You gotta add your 2 cents. And it's just like, I didn't know how to do that. So my mechanism for listening is patience. Like my mechanism for a lot of things is patience, meaning I'm showing patience and I'm going to wait. I'm going to let you get it out. Like a lot of times I'll let them get it out and then there's an awkward silence, right? Because I'm trying to be patient. I'm going to sit here, make sure you got everything out. And now I can say something rather than feeling this urge to jump. And I've had to develop that for myself.
Yeah. Well, how many times I know I have had conversations where something is going on, I allow my impatience to happen. And then before you know it, like we're talking about whether we're wearing blue or yellow. And before you know it, we're over here talking about, you know, I don't know, whatever happened 3 years ago. Right. And so I
Right.
think that what the patience allows for is that space to be able to create something new because you're allowing things to land. Words have power. And if we're throwing words at a person, it's almost like having a person on the ropes. and they're just receiving all this information. They don't have a chance to catch their breath. And then before you know it, everyone's over, you know, to the right somewhere, when in fact staying with the conversation is what's going to actually get to resolution.
Right.
You know. Before we get into, I want to talk about sister, I want to kind of move over into what led you to this work. And before we get there, I thought for some reason, as you mentioned that you were originally from Long Beach, I remembered that you said that during Soulful Saturdays, but in my head, I thought you were born in San Diego. Um, Before we get into this next thing, I want to ask, like, with you having grown up in San Diego, how has growing up in this environment with your upbringing and some of the lived experiences that you've had, how have those things shaped how you see people and your view on the differences between people?
Um, well, I would go back to my journey has been very interesting in San Diego, right? And it started again because when I moved from Long Beach, I was 13. And so when I was in Long Beach, the community I lived in was a primarily Black community. So when I moved to San Diego, I first moved to Southeast San Diego. And we stayed there for a while, and that was familiar to me, right? I went to Horace Mann Middle for eighth grade, and then I went, so we were there, and that was familiar to me. And then we went straight from there to Spring Valley, where I went to Monte Vista High School. And when I went to Monte Vista at the time, 89, 90, there were very few Black people at the school at that time, right? So, here I am again, feeling like, how do I fit in, right? How do I talk to people? How do I get people to understand me? So I feel ultimately when you ask that question, because my journey has been so interesting in terms of going back and forth between communities, you know, San Diego for me was this thing of very uncomfortable because of where I came from in Long Beach, right? It was very different, very community oriented. I got out here and it was different to me. And I found myself again having to fit in all over. Um, and that was very hard, especially, you're going into high school. That was very hard for me. Moving to a new place. I think, I moved here because my mom died when I was 13. So I was still dealing with her death and the grief of her death and not even knowing how to deal with that. So, I had all these things going on when I moved out here. So San Diego was just a very, uncomfortable and uh, different environment for me.
At an uncomfortable time.
Right. Very uncomfortable.
May I ask, did you move here with family?
Yeah, and this made things, and maybe this is part of the whole thing too. This was uncomfortable too. So when I moved out here, so my mom died of cancer, and there was this conversation that was had that I wasn't privy to, but she had talked to my brother, who was a senior at San Diego State at the time. So if you can imagine, I'm 13 years old. I'm coming to live with my brother, who's a senior at San Diego State, and here comes his little brother, right? And now he has to go from just, living his life in college, to now having to take care of his brother. And I remember it's so funny because I remember the first night I got there, I have another brother and they're about, he's my older brother's, the oldest brother's 2 years older, but they're both at San Diego State. So the first night I got there, they're going out to the club. So, right. So it's my two brothers in the mirror for 35 minutes trying to get ready to go out to the
Come on.
club. Right. so,
Yeah.
so that's what I walked into, right, as a
Mhm.
13-year-old. So but we had a lot of challenging situations with him trying to figure out, he's my brother, but he also has to be in the role of being my father father figure. So there was a lot of uncomfortable situations that came along with that. But I was
Yeah.
lucky because my brother was one of the most solid human beings, that I could have, that could have been fit into that role. So
Hats off to your brother for what's his name?
Rodney.
Hats off to Rodney for stepping into that role because that is tough, especially when you're at the standing in the mirror for 35 minutes part of your life.
Right.
And you got
Exactly.
some little boy who needs you to be his father figure. That creates like a dual uh, world for him. So
Yeah.
hats off to Rodney for
Yeah.
doing that.
Hmm.
We appreciate you, Rodney.
Yeah. He's still my hero.
Yeah, that's because that was a heroic feat. We talk a lot about the legacy that we want to leave, but what about the one that we're living in right now? I'm Lisane Basquiat. I'm a board-certified NLP expert and a legacy healing strategist. I created Shaping Freedom to help our community move from autopilot to authority. Whether it's through my podcast, the Lounging with Lisane meditations, or our signature candles and journals, I provide the elite tools that you need to heal and to lead your family more effectively. Own your evolution. Visit shapingfreedom.com. That's shapingfreedom.com. So, in terms of the way you acclimated here in San Diego as a 13-year-old, I'm assuming, eighth grade or whatever, um, how was that? Because you're coming into a completely different environment with a completely different world, personal world. And I'm asking this because very often we don't know what's happening with people. We have no idea, but they're going through the steps that we are in as we're living our lives. So, what was that like for you?
You know, and when you say you don't know what a person is going through, a lot of what I was going through when I was 13 is I didn't know what I was going through.
Yeah.
Um, I, one of the things that I think about a lot is that after when my mom died, I never cried. I never really even thought about it. I kind of just moved on with my life. I realized later on what that was. It was me just basically shutting that, right.
Surviving. Yeah.
Yeah, cutting that out and just moving on. So I was dealing with that, and I think there was that, of course, dealing, my brother and our relationship and trying to figure that out, as he's having his own life. I think going back to what I said about, kindergarten and junior high, the way I ended up dealing with everything was I became, I was always popular. People always liked me. So I tell a lot of times I tell people that like racism for me wasn't really it probably wasn't as bad because everyone always liked me. And they liked me because, I won talent shows. I was one of the best dancers at the school. I was one of the best athletes at the school, in everything that I did. So it's like I was always liked by everyone because of all these different things that I think, and I think this was my way of fitting in, right? I think I developed this thing of going, okay, how do I fit in? Well, I'm going to fit in by, entertaining people. I'm going to fit in by being the best athlete. That's how I'm going to fit in. And that was kind of my life all the way, even in high school. So I was really good at football. So that kind of was a thing for me. Obviously, playing on a football team, I ran track, I did all these different things. So that made everything easier, right? That made my transition into things easier, which fortunately for me, because I don't know how I would have dealt with it otherwise.
Yeah. What led you into the work that you're doing today through the Sister Cities Project and through the being an author and sharing your perspective on what's going on? What led you into that?
I'm a spiritual person. And this all started with my mother. My mother, I think the whole point of me going back between different communities, and even with her deciding initially to put me in kindergarten at an all-white school, I think was her trying to show me something, right? She was trying to help me understand at that point. And I believe everything that I do to this day, like I've always, I number one feel like I'm living a life that my mom would be proud of. Number one. And I know now in hindsight the type of woman that my mother was. My mom was an angel. My mom was the woman in our neighborhood, in the community, where people went to her when they had problems, right? So I was actually in the living room a lot of times where she's talking to people. When she was at work, people are coming to her for advice, right? So these things were ingrained in me as far as the type of human that I wanted to be. And so I think, at some point, even going through the transitions in my life and looking at, the misunderstandings between people, especially when it came to me, dealing, being around, in an all white community, and then realizing how they misunderstand people from under resourced communities. As you're going back, and I've always had this thing in me, like, how are people getting it this wrong, right? So I think that has always been in me, and so I had always wanted to do something. I just didn't know what it was, and I went through all my challenges, and of course I think that, when Sister Cities finally came to me, I call it was a gift from my mother. She gave it to me. I just needed to figure out what the framework was going to be.
What were you seeing that other people didn't seem to be clear about?
So that was a very specific moment for me. So it's COVID. So 2020, when the George Floyd thing happened, right? I am sitting there and I'm watching TV, and we're all glued to the TV. We're all trying to, what is going on
Figure out
here?
what's going on.
Yeah, I'm watching everything. I'm watching the news. I'm watching all these different whatever it is about what's going on in America that's making this happen. And as I'm listening to everything that's going on, it hit me like a ton of bricks all at once, which was, people were talking about policy changes. They were talking about racism in general. How do we end racism? And literally, because of these experiences we're talking about, what hit me was the understanding part. All at once, I said, you know what? No, it's none of that. It's the fact that we're so segregated right now, and people are not trying to understand each other. And I heard something really profound, and this is what kind of confirmed that for me. I think I was watching. There was this panel discussion of all these leaders from across the country, Black leaders, and there was a woman who asked a question. One of the panelists, she said, and this was on Zoom. So she said, if if you have a friend, she asked the whole panel, she said, look, if you have a friend that is in need, what do you do? And the panel, everyone said, well, you help them, right? And then she goes, if there is a person over there that's in need, what do you do? And, some people said, okay, well, you help them. Other people said, well, you don't know that person. So what do you do? And that hit me all at once, meaning if you don't know a person, why would you help them? Right? There's no, if you don't know, how do you help them? And that's what we have going on right now. It's like there are many people that need help, need to be understood, all these things, but we're so segregated that people are deciding to stay in their own silo and only help the people that they're around, and only help the people that are in their own communities and things like that. So that's how I figured that out at that point.
And so when you say understanding each other, what is the thing that's actually breaking down? What is breaking down that needs resolve?
I think you mentioned it earlier, the uncomfortable part, right? The I think our society has gone in this direction where everything is about you, right? Everything is about making you comfortable. They're your songs, they're your TV channels, they're your this, your that. Social media is your algorithm, the stuff you want to see, right? So we're being programmed to be, it's all about me and all about making me comfortable. And we're less willing and less apt to say, I'm going to seek out, right, being uncomfortable. So I think that's the problem. I think, I was talking to someone the other day where it's this thing of, if you really look at your friend groups, right? They're all people for the most part, and not everyone, but a lot of people surround themselves with people that make them comfortable, right? That have the same thought process, that are not going to, rock the boat when you're around them. You just want this fun time, that's what we're doing, and we're segregating ourselves without having dialogue in uncomfortable situations. So I think that's the little thing that's breaking down, that we need to somehow, and social media is a big part of that, but we need to somehow get that, do something about that.
Well, my friends better get it together, because they're constantly calling me on my crap, and I don't like it. They better fix that.
Hey, those are good friends, though.
Those are the
That's the
best
point.
friends.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have the best people around me. I truly, truly do.
Mhm.
Where do people get it wrong in these conversations that they're trying to have?
Well, I think people, and they say this a lot about like arguments and different things like that. It's listen to respond, right? It's that whole thing. I think we've had, we with Sister Cities Project, we've had over 39 or community forums where we've had uncomfortable conversations. And, like we said before, I think there is this thing of listening to respond, but also not having the patience. You want to jump in, you're trying to defend yourself, right? You need to defend yourself rather than listening to the person and actually understanding what they're saying. Like, even when we have these conversations, you will see, when we ask people to, talk and discuss things, you will still see that, right? Even though they know they're there to have uncomfortable conversations, you will see people feeling, when you have a group of white people and a group of black people discussing racial thing, things about wrong race, people want to defend themselves, right? Rather than listening to the other side. So I think that's where there's a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, I often say, and I think that there's this patience. It really taps into a person's patience, that unless you're really aware of what's going on, it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, to actually resolve the thing. You have to allow yourself to get to a point of awareness. And you get to awareness through patience and through a willingness to see and a willingness to hear something different than what you've heard in the past, or what you've been willing to open your ears to hear in the past. And that's what it sounds like you're describing. I want to talk about Sister Cities Project specifically, and I want to first put something else in the conversation, if that's okay.
Of course.
And thank you. And I'm going to say a couple of things. I'm from Brooklyn, and I am the
I know that.
daughter, because I say it, because I say it during every
Say it with your
conversation.
chest, huh?
I say it with my chest every conversation. I'm from
Right.
Brooklyn. And I'm from Brooklyn, and I'm also first generation. So I'm
Mhm.
first generation Haitian, and my mother was Puerto Rican. And I'll add to that, my parents were uh, broke up at a very early age for me. So what that meant was that I had a very different life than a lot of my schoolmates did, who had their mom at home, and oftentimes if there was a single parent situation, it was the mother that was in the home and the father that wasn't. And for me, it was different. And then my mom was mentally ill. And so she struggled with mental illness. And it was not seen in the way that it's seen today. The stigma around it was, I mean, there's some stigma around it today, but back then the stigma was because they didn't know what to do with
Right.
mental illness. And so I stepped into, because when you mentioned 13, I started thinking about my own 13-year-old experience. And what was happening for me at 13 was that I was internally dealing with all of these different things that made me different than other people. But what people saw was whatever it was that was going on. And for me, there came a time where I was like cutting school because I was like, I'm real smart and I don't have to go to the class because I'll just take the test and I'd ace it and I'd be fine. Right. And it was like, why do I have to come to class? And my teachers would be like, oh,
Right.
so good grades. I'm like, but I have good grades. What's the problem there? So I'd be going through some of that nonsense. But again, it was one of those situations for me where I felt at the time I felt comfortable with the way I was showing up in the world, but I know that there was this huge undercurrent of very adult situations and emotions that
Mhm.
I was grappling with, ignoring in some cases, and you know, acting out in others.
Mhm.
And then, I went out my life and I've always been in situations, both in my professional career, my corporate career, where I worked in financial services, and I was often the only Black woman in the room.
Right.
Um, and then and then, of all places on the planet, I moved to San Diego, being from Brooklyn. That is, New York is diverse, but it's diverse in a different way. It's not
Right.
just black and white. It's people from all over the world in this space together. And it brings forth different conversations, it brings forth different misunderstandings. And in New York, the way that you live is that you understand the difference.
Right.
It's
Right.
kind of embedded into the culture. Like, this person is from this place in the world, so they're gonna have an accent. They're gonna eat different food. You may smell different food coming down the block, like different things. And then years later, I wind up here in San Diego. And San Diego, I love San Diego. I love the community that I've built here. I have, a brick and mortar here. I've been here for 14 years, and it's not very diverse.
Right. Yeah.
It just isn't. And what I notice here is it's challenged me in an interesting, some interesting questions to grapple with around what does it look like when, yes, I feel very deeply rooted and seated, and I am,
Mhm.
and how do I navigate and negotiate things on a day-to-day basis? So the reason I'm bringing that up now is because, the thing that I really want to bring into the space is I now have a granddaughter who is going to school here in San Diego and in Carlsbad in particular.
Mhm.
And there was recently this situation that happened where this young girl was bullied
Mhm.
by a group of students that were white. And I know there's been some conversation around that, and it actually made the national news. It was a huge thing. And the reason I'm bringing it into the conversation is because while there are people from different, I think that as this particular part of the country becomes a little more integrated,
Mhm.
these conversations also need to happen within the same community.
Right.
And what I'm gonna kinda lay on you as you talk about Sister Cities project is the additional layer of the ways that we in this country are responding to the chaos that's
Mhm.
happening in this country, politically, socially, economically, in all the ways.
Right.
Um, and how that's trickling down into our students and children and grandchildren who are the 13-year-old Lisane and Shawn. And the thing that I keep grappling with is We here in San Diego have the ability to be around each other. I don't have to know what your politics are. I could guess, but I
Right.
don't have to know what your politics are. But what's not happening is I'm not in the grocery store having people confront me. I'm not being bullied. Or if there is a thing that I catch, we are able to navigate that as adults
Right.
in this part of the country. We're able to navigate it. I can go to Starbucks, I can get my coffee, you can get your coffee. Maybe we don't mess with each other, but we're able to do that in a civil way. For years, the 14 years that I've been in this part of this country, I have heard about this thing that has now also come up. Because
Right.
there's so many things coming up. This country's
Mhm.
in childbirth right now. All the
Mhm.
uncomfortable things are coming to the surface, right?
Yeah.
This isn't a one-time isolated incident. I have heard this from so many parents over the years that their Black children are in school and these are the kind of things that that's happening where they're being called nigger, they're being called like all these things are going on.
Yeah.
Um, so we need to have different conversations. And whatever it is that those adults know to do in order to survive, what they need to do and what the conversations that we all need to have are conversations of if you want to be racist, be racist. That's your business. Nobody can control what you think. But whatever it is that you're doing to survive, how about you make sure that your children know how to do that too so that they can survive?
Right.
Right? And what came up for me, and then I'm gonna stop talking. What came up for me was there was one of the mothers got very upset about the fact that the video circulated all over the place and wound up on national news. It was a whole big thing. And her request was, um, this has already been handled in school. Let it go. It's been resolved. That's number one. And then these are young children. And I get it because there's like we have this cancel culture thing that's going on. And so I can understand where if you have a child who's 11, 12 years old, you don't want your child to be marked by this behavior forever. But it's not on the internets. It's on what happens at home
Yeah.
because what happened at home is the consequence that we're experiencing in a very public way for this poor kid who's 11, 12 years old, who's being programmed and taking in information, is that he's carrying something for his parents.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
the parents don't seem to realize that because
Right.
they're blaming the people that are looking and pointing at it. So I'm adding that to the Sister Cities Project because it is April 2026 and we got to bring in some of what's happening in the world into this
Yeah.
conversation. So Shawn, what's the Sister Cities Project?
No. Well, was the question what is Sister Cities Project, or are you asking me specifically about that and how we deal with that?
I'm asking both, whatever you
Okay.
choose to respond to, and I'm asking, I guess the question I'm asking is respond to whatever resonates with you, whatever you want to say, and through the lens maybe of Sister Cities Project. And I know that that is very much about two different areas, neighborhoods talking to each other, but I see two different neighborhoods within a neighborhood that need to talk to each other. Maybe we can talk about some kind of thing we could do later, but that's what I'm putting on you.
No, I love that question. And what resonates with me so I did hear about that incident. Actually we were contacted, about that.
Okay.
And what resonates with me about that is I believe this is the work of Sister Cities Project, which is, see, here's the problem. The problem is that when things like this happen, like I said earlier, what people do is their mind goes towards policies, rules. Like, we need to change rules. We need to change policies. We need to change, like, that's where everyone's mind goes. Like, there has to be this concrete fix or nothing will be fixed and it's going to continue to happen. When you do that, you're jumping too far.
That's right.
Because really the problem is we're not talking. And even in this whole situation, as I was watching everything that was going on, I don't think they ever truly, I didn't see like this conversation happening of communities or people talking together. I saw one side talking and another side talking.
And the school in the middle of it.
In the school, right? Everybody having their own conversation, right? And that's the problem. The problem is that no one said, and this is where so 6 years of Social Cities Project, we are still fighting this battle of, you know what? When that happens, this is how I see it. Let Sister Cities Project come in and have a conversation with everyone involved, and let's be real about it. Let's have the courage to sit in the room and ask real questions about what's going on and why this is happening. That's the only way that then, because one of the things that we realized with Sister Cities Project is that we think because people are adults that they are aware of why people do things, right? Or that they are aware of the situation. They know that, this is like, also just to let you know, we do these conversations in areas like Solana Beach and Del Mar and Encinitas. And when we do them there, it usually tends to be, a mostly white audience. And then what we try to do is center Black voices so that, people can get that understanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had one early on in Solana Beach, and the topic was redlining. And so, if you can imagine, these are, I mean, in this audience are people from Stanford, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had, people that were elected officials, like, from Carlsbad or different places like that. And what, to my astonishment, half the room had never heard of the practice. So if you can imagine what that means you have people in positions of power, people that are well-meaning adults, 50s, 60s, that don't realize that there are reasons behind why certain people are in certain situations or why they act in certain ways. If you don't have that understanding, that's like, at that age as an adult, I didn't know that existed. And I'm saying, this is me, Sister Cities Project, 5 years ago, going, wow, I can't believe that no one knows about this practice, right? And so all of our events, something like that comes up where you have people that they don't understand, they don't, and we just assume that they do. And so until you get them in the room and have them say, like, one other thing real quickly. So before I did Sister Cities Project, I had this thing in Solana Beach where I used to do race discussions. It was called Skin in the Game. And I remember the very first one, it was me, and I started it with this, his name was Ron, he was Japanese American. And then the first one, it was like all 70-year-old white women, right? So that's what the group was. And there was like 12 70-year-old white women and me and Ron.
Mm-hmm.
And as I started talking about my, growing up in Long Beach and how I had been pulled over by like, the first time I said that I had actually been pulled over by the police, women gasped. And I was like, wait, this, you guys didn't know that, like, it's actually a real thing that, like, Black people get pulled over for no reason
It's
whatsoever.
not just TV. It's not just movies.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you didn't know that? You thought that was, we're playing around with about that. And so it's things like that where you realize we are not talking to each other.
That's right.
We're passing, we are conversating, but we're not really talking. So I believe that the solution to everything that's going on, like, we actually wanted to do this thing where I had this little saying where I thought, where instead of like Starbucks on every corner, we need a place where you can go have a discussion on every corner. Because that's something that people need in their daily life to understand each other. So that's what I see the true problem is. Before we get to policy, one last story, and I'll shut up. Like but
I'm listening patiently.
yeah, I know. Of course you are. I know you are.
I'm listening patiently. They all
I'm
are. We're
I'm
fine.
talking. I tell the story. I tell this a lot, which is if there is if there's a judge on a bench that has never had any black friends, and a black man comes walking into the courtroom, how do you think he's going to deal with that person? The opposite being a judge on the bench that has black friends and understands black people, whatever it is, how do you think he's going to deal with that person? And that's what we're dealing with in America, which is that situation. How you understand things is how you're going to deal with certain situations. And we have people in our government, in places of power, who have no idea the people that they are actually, making laws and policies and for. We need to somehow do something about that part.
So what actually happens? So you facilitate these conversations and you facilitate the space for these conversations. What actually happens when you bring people with differing perspectives into a room? Bring us into what that experience is like.
Number one, it's very uncomfortable. And I mean, to the point of, as you know, and I don't moderate them anymore, but I moderated the first like 35 or whatever it was. But as a moderator, people say you can cut it, you can cut the
Tension with a knife.
tension with a knife. When we bring up the subjects when it comes to racial equity and race and different things like that, and you have a room full of, where people are white, and then you also have a room, people are black, and you bring these things up, you can feel it.
Yeah.
Right? You can feel how uncomfortable people are. And I think what we try to really do is, like, one of the things that I really try to do is make sure everyone feels safe in the room, right? And we talk a lot about that early on because, I also feel like on the other end of that, and the reason we do that is because I feel like on the other end of that, we have this thing where, and I'll just get as an example. Early on, we had this chart where it was two lines on the end and one line in the middle. And on one end, it was being anti-racist. On the other end, it was racist. And then there was dots, black dots all over the chart. And then there was an arrow going from racist to anti-racist. So the point of that is to say, like, what we try to do in these groups is, like, it doesn't matter where a person is starting from, as long as their attitude is moving towards anti-racist, right? As long as they're on that journey, it doesn't matter where they're at on that journey. And that's to try to allow people to say what they need to say.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think what we do as Black people, I think one of the most detrimental things that we do is that when a person is trying to move towards being an ally, right, and they say the wrong thing, as Black people, we shout them down, right? And we make them feel uncomfortable. And then what do? They recoil. They go back to, you know what? See, I shouldn't have done that. I'm just going to go back and I'm never doing that again, right? And we have a tendency to do that. And these are people that are trying to be on that journey towards being allies. And if we would bring them in instead of shouting them down, we'd have many more allies that are helping us, on this journey towards getting, ending racism. So that's kind of, we try to make the environment very comfortable so people feel like they can say what they need to say. We actually have a portion where people talk. We try to get a person, a Black person and a white person talking together. And just for reference, the reason Sister Cities Project, of course, you can't focus 100% on the relationship between Black and white people because there are different people, within San Diego County or throughout the, United States. But the way I see it is, for the United States in general, specifically, I call it the original sin is slavery, right?
Yeah.
The original sin is slavery. And until we until we do something about that original relationship between black and white people, I feel like it's hard to move other things, right? But if we can ever reconcile that relationship, I think that just automatically trickles down to everyone else, because now we're just talking about true equity, right? We're talking about true equality. If that relationship can be mended. So that's why we've started, and I feel like that's like the hardest place to start in America, right? So that's why I talk a lot about that. But we have these different situations where people talk. And I think at the end of this, I can give you countless stories of how, people have become friends, right? People that you would never have, imagined would be friends, like a woman that lives in Solana Beach with a woman that lives in Southeast San Diego. And then what happens is she's helping her with her business, right? She's introducing her to a new network, to new people. Her business is thriving just because of this relationship, right? And this person's teaching them about this culture and the resilience of people. I think it's a beautiful connection, and we've seen it numerous times if people will just get in the room with one another.
It's interesting. We're talking about the topic, and I'm speaking with Shawn McClendon, who is the founder of the Sister Cities Project, which is a nonprofit focused on putting differing neighborhoods together to communicate more effectively, and typically with a maybe higher income earning community with another one. And what I'm thinking about as you're talking is that people believe, and maybe it's because of the reasons you mentioned before with the algorithm and the individualism, people believe that um, you can fragment yourself into different buckets of behavior. But the truth is that you are the same person showing up to every area of your life. And so the topic that you're talking about is the topic of racism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what I see as the undercurrent to the topic is truly what you're teaching people is how to communicate more effectively through listening, how to communicate more effectively through understanding, and through allowing enough of a pause in a conversation to be able to let another person empty themselves of what they're thinking so that you can in turn do the same. And it
Right.
doesn't mean that we walk away completely understanding every single aspect that was shared, but just the awareness and the sharing. There's so much power in just that.
Yeah. And that's what I think we've seen the most of. And I think people underestimate that part, right? Which is, the seed that is planted. Like you're saying, I think part of what we've seen is like a person comes into that room. Maybe this person doesn't care at all about this topic. Maybe even they are totally shutting the whole thing down and not even listening. Maybe they're there because their wife told them to come, right? I think what happens, no matter what, no matter where that person is, there's going to be something that happens in that room, however small, where they're going to leave and they're going to think about it, right? No matter, there's always going to be something when you have that topic, that discussion in that type of room, that person leaves, and I think they're changed. I think they're changed because there is a seed that is planted, no matter how small, that they now have to think about that. Because one thing that's going to happen is at some point they're going to have to talk about that again. Whether it's them saying, "Where did you go? Where were you guys at?" "Oh, we went to this event where." "What were they doing?" "Oh, well, we were talking about race." Right? You have to think about it again. So I think that we underestimate that. And that goes back to the understanding part. We underestimate these things that seem small, that can be more powerful than we give credit to. And so that's why I think understanding is so important. And I think so one of the through lines for me as an individual, these are words that I in my personal life. And I actually have a program that I teach with this, but compassion, courage, and authenticity. So when you show up in an event like this, you have to have compassion for another person, right? You also have to have compassion for yourself, to understand, to sit there in that room and understand that you might not like what someone is saying, but you have to have compassion for yourself. You have to have courage, right? It takes courage to come to something like this, and it takes courage to sit in this uncomfortable situation. But you have to have some courage, and then there's authenticity. The only way, to me, someone can truly understand you is if you are willing to come authentically into that conversation. And so I think those are the through lines for me in these events. It's like you have to have those three things. And I think as long as you have those three things, that's when you can really transform.
That's right. And even for the person who comes with some apprehension about whether or not it's helpful, it's the ability to learn a new skill. And so how you do one thing is how you do everything. So maybe you leave with with a gem about how to better understand the partner that brought you into the space. Maybe you get that out of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Shawn, you are the author of Understanding Each Other, the Blueprint for a New America. What do you think, or when you think about a new America, what does that actually look like in practice to you?
Yeah. So, I want to, when you said earlier in the conversation that, that's a big, big claim. I think, I think part of this is having the audacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
To say something like that.
Yeah.
And that's where it started for me. And like I said, I think a new America starts, for me, it's about going back to understanding that discourse is important. If I were to say it very simply, like the discourse should be a part of our everyday, thing that we do, and that it's okay to disagree with one another, right? And again, this is not something like where we're at in America right now. We got here over hundreds of years,
That's
right?
right. It's taken some time.
Yeah, we've got here doing the wrong things
Over
for a
and
really
over
long
and over again.
time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So to me, I think what makes me angrier than anything else, and one of my pet peeves is that, for an organization like ours, I started Sister Cities Project with the idea of people sit in a room to understand each other. I think that is the most important thing that we can be doing right now.
I agree.
Because if we keep doing it, and shout out, anybody out there at the Carlsbad, the Unified School District. I think they're San Diego actually, but we would love to have a conversation with them because
I think it's unified.
okay, the point is that we have to be patient. Going back to that, and we have to say that conversation after conversation after conversation is the way we're going to change our society, right? And people understanding each other, and so to me, that's how we're going to create a new America. Everyone, I think the hard part is everyone right now wants to say, change the policies. But how do you change the policies if you're not changing the mind of the people that are making the policies?
That's right.
That's the challenge, right?
That's right. It's substance. We have
Mm-hmm.
to bring some substance into the matter.
Right.
Right. And versus throwing, these rules are not the thing that changes. Those are guideposts.
Right.
Rules and policies are guideposts. But if you're expecting human beings to be in support of or to operate within a certain guideline, we have to get back to talking to each other. And we cannot hide behind policy and law and the school and all of these things that simply bring us to a place where we remain individualistic in our approach, where the school talks to, and I'm not putting it on, this is actually in support of the school, right? The school's there to teach our children. It's not fair to make them also play the role of mediator. We have to speak with each other because that's how we change things.
Well, and I look at, that part about compassion and courage because I think that the school also needs to have the compassion or the courage to reach out to an organization like ours, right? And say, hey, we need to have this conversation, right? We need to figure out a way to have this conversation with all parties. Like that's what I would love to, when we talk about a new America. I would love to see some type of mechanism where the first thing is a discussion between all the parties involved, right? I think so many things could be solved if we just say, first things first, let's talk about it.
The
Right?
two people who are there, the two people who are in it. Yeah,
Right. Let's talk about it. Let's see what your side is. Let's see what your side is and see, what is the understanding here? What are we not understanding? What are we misunderstanding about the situation? And I think we would go so much further with that
I agree.
than, okay, we need to change. What do we need to change at the school to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Right.
That's right. So, I would love to help in some way. So, if I don't know how far you've gotten or where you are, but if there's something that I can do to help, I would love to support that because I really love it here, and I can see where there's just so much misunderstanding. And so if there's something I can do, including, using the space at Hera Hub Carlsbad that I own or anything else, so we can talk about that offline. In the meantime, what can we do to support you, Shawn, and to support Sister Cities projects?
Well, first and foremost, as we all know, nonprofits, we're a 501(c)(3), so donations, number one. And that's first and foremost for me because I think people, even when we're talking about having these conversations and what people think about these types of conversations, I think our nonprofit struggles because of the type of nonprofit that we are and what we're trying to get people to understand, right? This is something that people look at as this is not important, right? Racism is, some people think there's no racism, right? So when we come along, I think people, when we look at lists of what philanthropy dollars go, social justice and things like ours are the last on the list, right? So I think that's number one, because I would love for our organization to be a sustainable organization that's able to have these conversations across the country all the time. And I think that's where we start to really put a dent in racism. So of course, you know, uh, funding, donations, and I would say, other than that, I would just say I would make a plea, a serious plea for people to be courageous. When they see a Sister Cities Project event, or even an event in your community, I think a lot of people say to themselves, "I'm not going to go to that because it's going to be uncomfortable," like you said. And so I would just really, really like a heartfelt plea to people to understand that the power, right, of putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation, no matter how you feel about it, or no matter how you feel about it even coming out, but the power of putting yourself in that situation is transformative, and we've seen it over and over and over again. So my plea would just be, please, when we have events or people have events where we're talking about these really tough, uncomfortable conversations, people need to come out in droves. Because if you're sitting there thinking, what's wrong with America and what needs to happen, you need to get to a conversation that's going to help you understand something. That's what's going to change things. So I think for me, ultimately, those two things would be, those are the two things we would like to see.
Shawn McClendon is the founder of Sister Cities Project in San Diego. He's also the recent author of Understanding Each Other, The Blueprint for a New America. Shawn also has a vision for a new America that is around healthier communication, courage, um, compassion, both for other people and for ourselves as we navigate the torrential chaos that is going on inside us and also outside as we're navigating the world. I encourage you to support this organization if you have the ability to do so. If you can do it in a straightforward donation based way, that's amazing. Or even if there are resources or opportunities or things that you can do, any way that you can help to support this organization that is so deeply committed to helping us to get to a place where we think beyond racism, think beyond the things that separate us, and really lean into the areas where we can simply learn how to listen.
I would also say, there's this thing where there's this thing where people, I believe, because I was started with saying supporting Black businesses, right? Or, going to Southeast San Diego, going to City Heights, going to communities that you don't necessarily go to, and enjoy the things that are there. And I was going to make the point that I think one of the things that a lot of people do, like, it's funny because when I lived in Solana Beach, I realized it's a bubble. Like, and you never leave, right? And then it's
Yeah,
the same thing if you live, in Southeast San Diego or downtown. Like, it's a
yeah.
bubble and you don't leave. And it's just, I feel like people, again, going back to the courage part, I think there should be this inherent value of going to see things that are different, right? Going to visit communities that are different, supporting Black businesses just because. So I think everyone should have this, okay, as a community, as a community as a whole, we need to just start doing this thing of support and having compassion for other groups and other communities and help and support them. So I just want to put that out there as well.
Shawn, thank you so much. We went over, but it was it was good work. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for being so generous with your time this morning and for spending time talking about this. I think that this is one of the most, and you said it, and I'm agreeing with you, one of the most important things that those of us who are clutching our pearls and wringing our hands about everything that's going on, there is something that we can do. Yes, vote. Yes, be involved. Yes, be a responsible citizen in whichever way that resonates for you. And there are things that we do have the power to do right now, today. So if you want to hear more about this man's perspective, purchase his book, Understanding Each Other: The Blueprint for a New America. If you want to see it in practice, look up Sister Cities Project and get yourself involved there, and follow Shawn. And that information will be in the show notes. But I want to thank you, Shawn, so much for your time. And I want to thank everyone for listening. And if this conversation resonates with you, please like and share and tell somebody about it, and tag me so I know that people are listening. And yeah, so thank you so much.
Lisane, I just want to tell you, I'm obviously watching everything that you do, and I just want to give you your flowers and just tell you that I appreciate everything you're doing, and I love it, and I watch you, and so thank you. I just want to thank you.
Thank you a lot. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I really do.
You're very welcome.